Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skyllful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs. Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lake, and today we have a different kind of episode. I know I always say that they're special, and they always are, but today's episode is going to be a little different than what we've done in the past because we actually have a Skyllful customer on with us today. He's an amazing professional. He happens to be the enterprise asset manager for Denbury. Please welcome to Frontline Innovators, Gary Brown. Hello, Gary.
Hey, how you doing, Justin? Glad to be here.
Really, really happy to have you here. And just, as a note to all of our listeners, I'm not going to let this turn into just an outright Skyllful commercial, but we have done over 100 episodes. And we've really tried to keep this a very high level thought leadership set of conversations. And we talk about the challenges of technology adoption with frontline workforces, specifically around field service. We happen to have a guest here today who has dealt with these challenges both before and after Skyllful. He's a good friend of ours at Skyllful, and we love the folks over at Denbury. And I just thought, man, it'd be crazy for us to get into this conversation and just not open it up a little bit more to talk about the before and after Skyllful. Will some of this come off a little bit like a commercial of Skyllful? Sure. And I'm going to ask you to just forgive me for this one time because I think we all have a lot to learn. This won't all be about Skyllful, but we definitely have some things that we can learn from that, whether you're using Skyllful or not. So without any further ado, let me get into the way we start off every single one of these episodes and ask Gary what you think is the biggest challenge facing the deskless or frontline workforce today.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about this question, there's a lot of answers, but if I had to pick one out, it's really like sometimes when we're going to roll out a program, we kind of feel like, and we're setting up the training, sometimes we think, one recipe fits all, right? And the bottom line is like everybody's an individual, everybody learns differently, and we need to make sure that, we're empowering people to know, to see how going to that deskless workforce is going to benefit them, the company, and overall their families, through the duration of this magic carpet life of life, so pretty much, that's what I see. You get in this mindset of like, hey, this is that one process that's going to kind of just, take us across the finish line. And more often than not, you have to swerve outside those lines a little bit and fit it for more of the individual and cover a broad range of personalities and learners.
I think I'm guilty at times of being a seeker of a silver bullet. I want to just find the answer. And what I hear you saying today is there isn't an answer. It's a bunch of answers. It's a bunch of different approaches. And we need to be thinking about all of those people. And I think that it makes perfect sense. And I know I consider myself pretty sensitive to the needs of those frontline workers. And I know I probably still would have a tendency to allow myself to think that there's a single answer. And so I appreciate you raising that point. I think it's a really good one.
Yeah. And I think that just, obviously I have ideas just like everybody else. And sometimes I believe my idea is the best idea. Right. But just taking that feedback and really measuring your success in your training program, and taking the feedback of how learners digest some of that information and how far, how fast and how far you're getting through with it, with whatever program is crucial to making sure that your scope isn't so one directional and it creates a, more broader range of ways for people to get information and move the needle.
You have such a strong connection to the people side of the business. I want to dig into that more a little bit later. You and I've
Yep.
talked about this in separate conversations, and I think it's really pretty neat because it seems to be a common theme amongst Skyllful customers is that they tend to be very, very connected to the people element. So in your whole description right now, I didn't hear you talk about the technology or your vendor selection on the technology or the workflows or how the business analyst documented the work. It was none of that. What's going to make a difference here is how we interact with the people that are on the other side of these processes. And that's going to be what makes a big difference. So I'm really glad you shared that. Let's give the audience a little bit of background. Where did you come from? How did you end up at Denbury? And how did you end up in the role you're in today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just came up in the trade doing electrical work, was licensed in that, doing more like of a commercial type electrical work, whether it was shopping centers or big department stores. And then I was living in Florida at the time, and I had an opportunity to come work in the Houston area and picked up a job, working in the industrial industry, working turnarounds and big plants and refineries and on the chemical side as well. After I worked through that, I mean, we just, I landed a job with Denbury. They were one of our customers with the vendor I was working with. And, I started there as an electrician as well, instrumentation and electrical technician, kind of worked my way up, did planning and scheduling, maintenance planning and scheduling. After that, I was a production foreman over a CO2 flood in the Houston area. And then we also had, and then I moved on to the EAM analyst, which was more of like supervisor role over the planners and schedulers. And now I'm the EAM manager, and that's over planning and scheduling, our center of excellence for SAP EAM, and warehouse and inventory operations.
Okay. That's awesome. You're really the perfect person to talk about this because you are both boots on the ground. You've been there, you've done this, and now you have a role essentially, even though you don't work at headquarters officially, your role essentially reports into headquarters as a corporate function today.
Yes.
So you're a perfect liaison to the guys that are out in the field. And I can't wait to explore that a little bit more with you. So let's get started. I obviously know a little bit of the history of Denbury and mobile technology deployments. I'm not looking to pour salt in any wounds. Okay. So that's not why I want to ask these questions, but I really want to ask in terms of lessons learned from previous engagements. I've always found that when people are at large companies like Denbury are doing a mobile technology deployment to the frontline workforce, the first time there are a lot of lessons learned because it just seems like it should be easier than it is, right? It just seems like, man, it's just a bunch of iPads. How freaking hard can this possibly be, right?
Yep.
And you guys had a moment, I think, where maybe you were thinking along some of those lines. So tell me, before using Skyllful, before we even get into the current state of where you're at today, share with us some of the lessons that you guys learned when you rolled out. We don't have to mention any brand names, but they're previous to the SAP EAM deployment. There was a deployment of another technology. What are some of the lessons that you learned from that experience?
Well, I believe one of the biggest takeaways was pretty much like, hey, you're not going to hire a plumber to do your electrical work, and vice versa. Just like I'm not going to ask my maintenance supervisor to head my training program. Right. So like that was probably one of the biggest things that, that my takeaways is like, there's professionals out there that do this for a living, and they can give you, some guidance, right? And now it's a partnership. It's going to go back and forth, right? But That's probably one of the biggest takeaways. Another thing is like, okay, in this case, it was a mobility solution, on an iPad. So like not having that information readily available on your iPad, maybe if you didn't have service or something like that, was an issue. So I got to go back to the office to get a refresher, things like that. Made it difficult. We learned that, having something that's on your tablet, and it's readily available to you, to work through. That's a big piece, the information being there, right? I think communicating your help desk ticket process, or if you have an issue, making sure that's overly communicated, like it's laminated on in the hallway in the maintenance shop, right? It's everywhere. Like they know who they need to call first when they have an issue, things like that. No, letting people know that you're there to support them. Information is readily available, and you can't tackle this journey alone. You need somebody that knows what they're doing to help guide you.
This, those are really good points. Hell, I know some things that the audience obviously doesn't know. Tell me about some of the things, because I don't want to make it seem as if Denbury just threw these iPads out there in the past and just like, oh crap, it's not working, right? Of course, that's not the case. You guys
Right.
had
It was
actually
no
put quite a
different.
bit of thought. You had actually put some production into creating some training content and stuff like that. So let's
Yeah.
give credit where it's due. You had actually made a pretty significant investment of time and probably some money in putting out what you put out.
Yeah.
You mentioned the offline use. I can see that being something, because if I remember correctly, you guys had published that content like on SharePoint or a similar
Yes.
tool.
Yeah. It was like a Microsoft stream video. We had it
Okay.
on a SharePoint.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So let's just talk through some of the materials. I mean, I know one of your teammates had built out some video content and
Yep.
had kind of talked through the video a little, or excuse me, talk through the workflows in the application.
Yeah.
Did you guys also have PowerPoint materials that supported the trainers when you did any instructor-led training? I actually don't know this. Did you guys do
Yeah.
instructor-led training?
Yeah. We had some PowerPoint stuff, and, we had like the functional spec from the vendor and different click here, click there type information. But, and I don't want to turn it back into what we talked about earlier, but like some people learn in different ways, and so maybe going through a 3-ring binder that we had that they can throw on their truck seat, or something like that wasn't the best. And the guys are out in the field, things get tore up riding around in the pickup truck. It's a lot of times they're not working in a clean environment. Some of these guys are living in their vehicles, it feels like, so just keeping all that stuff together can be tough. And as far as the videos go, looking back and what I know today, like you have we made videos, but they were quite long, right? And it wasn't kind of broke out to like hit a specific topic at times. It may cover 3 or 4 things in that video, and there wasn't a way to say, hey, I want to do this part of of whatever application I'm using. It was like you had to watch this whole video and try to find that 10 seconds that meant something to you in that moment. And frontline workers, the bottom line is they're going to be, they're hired to be on their tools, taking care of that stuff in the field. It's not real good use of company money and their time. And, it just makes it very cumbersome. And, when things are cumbersome and they make jobs harder, adoption's tough.
Did they give you, so I understand, and you and I have talked about the length of the videos, and that's something that we really advocate for. We, not just in the videos, but in the simulations that we create in our platform, we really advocate for bringing them down to as small of a micro lesson as is practical for that particular workflow.
Yep.
We actually, we had some data. I haven't looked at this data recently, but we had some data previously that after 14 steps in a lesson, we saw an exponential increase in the number of failures that learners conducted or experienced through that lesson. So I'm not saying that every lesson has to be 14 steps or less. I think there are certainly cases where, a few more steps in that are appropriate for a workflow. But we had some real data. This wasn't just subjective opinion saying, hey, I think it should be less than 15. We actually had objective data in the system now that could show that a lesson that was 14 steps or less, more often than not, a knowledge check could be passed on the first attempt, whereas anything over 14 steps, we were starting to see increases of 3, 4, 5 times. And what we also saw in that case was people starting to kind of circumvent the system. They were actually cheating, and they were recording the lessons, the simulations on their own smartphone so that they could have like a cheat sheet so that they could get through the lesson. And it was like, oh gosh, this is not what we should be doing here, right?
Right.
But for once, it wasn't just an opinion that somebody thought in the conference room, hey, we should make these 14 steps or less. We actually had real data to go on. And so your observations and the data are aligned perfectly. There's value in keeping those things short.
Yep.
The part that you mentioned that I want to explore a little bit further is like the feedback from the guys in the field. You said their primary job is not to be messing around with an app and an iPad. Their primary job is doing something else.
Yeah.
What was their feedback? Is that your take on that? Or is that them coming back and saying, guys, I can't do this because you want me fixing these, piece of equipment?
Yeah. So this is what I'm going to say. A guy didn't choose a career path to be a mechanic because he wanted to spend his time on an iPad. Like, he likes going out there and he likes getting that big machine running, throwing around some big wrenches, being where the metal meets the meat, right?
Yep.
And that's not where he wants to spend most of his time. And I guess I can relate to that personally, because I'm, to be honest, when we got us an ERP system going, and I was a I&E technician and I had work orders to close, like when it first rolled out, I mean, I'm going to tell you, like, I was not happy. Right. So now I have to come in and get on my laptop and print out my shop papers and make sure I, take care of this administrative burden. You may work, say you have something down, you could work till 10 o'clock at night. It's pretty tough to come back to your office at 10 o'clock at night and close out your work orders for the day.
Yep.
And, just the experience with that was that it was clunky, some of the training that we had. It was like, hey, we're going to stick you in this room for 3 days. We're going to spend 9 hours a day on it. And going back to what we were talking about, like cutting it up in little pieces, like, as well as I do, you sit in a meeting for an hour and a half and you're starting to look like, man, when is this going to be over? This is getting painful. That last piece of it, the details in the last 30 minutes of that hour and a half meeting, hopefully you got the important stuff out of the way in the beginning, because a lot of people are checked out, and like when you talk about technology, there's so many distractions these days.
This falls into one of the many, many items in the category of, I knew there would be value in building those practices, the practice simulations in Skyllful for the purposes of getting them used to those workflows, right? Getting them prepared for the knowledge check. The part that I way underestimated when we kicked this thing off is the value that it would have on their psyche.
Yeah.
That the confidence boost, the ability to allow them to learn without the consequences, I way underestimated the impact of that. And I still think today we experience this all the time, that users, I believe, still don't even call into support as often as they need to. They try to power through things that they don't know how to do, or that something's not working right, but they sometimes lack the confidence to call in because they feel like it's a indication of failure. And those practices and the feedback that we get on that is profound, because it really speaks to the importance of just giving them that place that they can go And then I'm sure they know that the number of practices are being counted and stuff like that. But as you know, we've made a point to not show that. It doesn't show you've done the practice 7 times, now 8 times, now 9 times, now 10 times.
That's
Like
right.
we're tracking that on the back end, but we don't show that in the user interface because I don't want them to feel like, oh crap, if my boss sees that I've done this 15 times, he's going to wonder what the hell's wrong with me. Right. So
Yeah.
we don't want to show that. And it's not really the point. To the point when you answered their question, it's like, yeah, you could do them as many times as you want. We want them to do that.
That's right.
And give them the flexibility. In fact, I would encourage them to do them as many times as they need to. And so it's so rewarding to hear you bring that feedback back from the field. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm really happy to hear that.
It's a powerful part of the tool for sure, and it just makes them feel safe. I don't know if you I read a lot about, like team cultures and culture and stuff like that. People just want to feel safe. They want to be valued, those type of things. So giving them the opportunity to make a mistake before you judge them is huge.
Pardon the interruption, but we have decided to split this conversation into 2 episodes. Gary and I went to a little over an hour, and we're going to break it up into 2 episodes. So we're going to wrap up this episode now. Before I close this out, I'd like to let everyone know that Gary and I will be hosting a joint session at an awesome upcoming event. The Operational Excellence in Oil and Gas Summit will be held in Houston, Texas, November 7th through 10th, where Gary and I will host a roundtable discussion titled Driving User Adoption of Field Applications. For more information about the event and how to attend, please feel free to reach out to me directly, shoot me an email, or message me on LinkedIn, and I'll point you in the right direction. And finally, unless this is your first episode, you probably already know that this podcast is sponsored by Skyllful, the only end-to-end systems training platform optimized for frontline operations. You can learn more about how to solve your frontline systems training challenges by visiting skyllful.com. That's SKYLLFUL.com. Stay tuned for the rest of the conversation in our next episode of the podcast. Thank you.